It, it's just an amazing number of people that I thought we were all zoomed out, but here we are. And thank you for the introduction, Shelf Life Books. And I think what I would like to do is just maybe turn it over to Pam for her reading, because Stuart tells me this is an amazing book. I already knew that, but now that Stuart has said that, we need to move on. And we're going to be doing a few Q&A afterwards. I have some questions that I primed Pam for, and I wonder if you can just sort of keep in mind that this work is not only one that is well crafted, but comes from a place of deep grief and a personal place that has achieved a high level of craft as well. And I think that is an astonishing achievement for poetry as well. So I really would like to just turn the rest of it over to Pam for the reading, and she'll let me know when she's done, and we'll pop right into those questions, because I think we all have them about grief and sorrow and the humanity that we've all been living through in the last 18 months. So Pam, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Vivian. Thank you, everybody. It's a wonderful turnout. I'm very honored. Of course, the first thanks have to go to Vivian, who's been my mentor over the past 4 or 5 years, and a great editor during the evolution of this book. So thank you, Vivian. I was very pleased and honored when you suggested that we might bring these poems into a publication. So, as many of you know, I lost my husband, Murray Marchand, who was my partner for 38 years. I met Murray when I was 19 and he was 25, way back. I won't give you the date, but it was a long time ago. He died suddenly and unexpectedly when he was only 63 in 2016. So I had written poetry really all my life, with very major gaps during the period when I was raising my children and working full time. It feels really funny to say that there can be a silver lining to a loss, but sometimes there are. And if there was a silver lining to this loss, it was that it kind of pushed me back into poetry. So I thought I'd start tonight sharing with you the poem called The River Styx. You lie on the bed, hard and cold. We're waiting for the medical examiner. This sudden gulf between us, inexplicable. I want to make stories of your last moments, bring you back to the land of the half-living. Begin the process of rebirth, the obituaries, calls to old friends, reconnection with family. They wheel you away from me in the crematorium. I am haunted by the image of your eyes melting. You were born and died without me. Now we share a world of our own, an island in the middle of the Black River. So a death is often associated with rivers. And I found when I went back to look at the poems to make the selection for this book, that river imagery kept resurfacing. And, you know, in a lot of those poems, Murray makes the crossing successfully. And I find myself kind of flailing around and sometimes drowning. So the second section of this book is called Drowning. And this poem is Off the Capilano Train Trestle. I have never been less dead than when at 10 I jumped feet first into a salmon run, felt on soles the slap, the rush, the 1,000 scarlet bodies thrashing, fought my way first down, then up, kicked through the suck of river, I was invincible. Now I fight through a river of grief, black and still, flooding through my days and nights, a cold promise of nothing. So sometimes, after a terrible loss, you feel not only sunk in despair, but also a little crazy. And when I looked through the poems, I thought, oh my God, there's a lot of poems here. I sound a little bonkers. I left the worst of them out for tonight, but I think you can see in the few short ones that I'll share with you that there's just that little edge. And the first one is called Sanskrit for Widow. In any book of poems, there are a lot of people that help you get there. And this poem went to Richard Harrison's. Richard's here tonight. Thank you, Richard. Poetry group. And I think it might have been the first poem I brought to that group. It's called Sanskrit for Widow. I turn a corner and see you with my third eye. You've become real in the world of the autonomic nervous system, fleeting through my kitchen like a painful doppelganger, playing with me, Vidheva. This one is called Calling My Voice. Voice, meet me in the corner where the cats won't stay, heart echo, tongue dry, calling, calling. I recognize your voice as a word once said. I can hear you hiding. Dark gathers, night stalks. Come, meet me in the corner where the cats won't stay. And this one, maybe with a touch of comic, but still a little touch of the crazy, called Summer Vision. Sipping a scotch, I see you walking like Christ on Honeymoon Bay. Yellow iris, scarlet wing, your shroud out of place in late evening sun. Raking my toes through cattail backwash, I know you've never been here before. Still, there you are, shimmering in a halo of dragonfly, light stepping the choppy waves, laughing like it's some kind of cosmic joke. So the middle of this book is called Surfacing, and I think that the middle section contains the strongest poems. The first poem that I'll share is called Echo of Ash. It's the title poem for the book, and I'd like to give a shout out to Freefall Magazine, who published this poem in, I think it was the spring of 2019. It's called Echo of Ash. I hold your box of ashes to my ear, listen for sounds of us on a weekend, eggs frying, kettle boiling, slap of stick in garage, reverberation of puck on wall, your voice reading a story. In the days before furnaces were so proficient, when bodies were burnt on headlands and beaches, it might have been a finger bone or a tooth someone listened to. I hold your box of ashes to my ear and hear the sound clouds make when they are making snow, a quiet, endless becoming. So the next poem I'll share with you, it was actually another Honeymoon Bay poem, but it was submitted for a writing contest and won the Shuswap Writers annual conference in 2020, which unfortunately was canceled. I was so sad because I would have been able to go there and have a free registration and read my poem, but I'll read it to you tonight. It's called Dust. You are everywhere in our house, sifted into drawers that stay closed for years, settled on the tops of books whose pages I will never open. Our resident spider remembers you, or its web does, the tremor of your step. In the fall, brown house moths wrap themselves in another kind of memory, a white cloud of forgetting that sleeps through the silence of winter, awakens in the spring to the sound of echoes. So when I was writing these poems, I was really looking for things about the loss and grief experience that were universal. I was lucky to get support through a place in Calgary. It's wonderful. It's called the Bob Glasgow Grief Support Center. And I was also a member of a grief support group, which was so helpful. Many people helped me get through that. But one of the cornerstones of that center is that everybody goes through the grief experience individually and on their own time. And it's nobody's place to judge somebody else's experience of grief. Having said that, however, there are common threads that run through the grieving process. Some experiences are shared among people. And this is the experience of knowing intellectually that death exists and that when somebody dies, they're gone, but really not coming to an emotional understanding of that knowledge until suddenly it hits you. And this one is called How to Pay the Gas Bill. How does it help to know that our bond continues as a silent conversation, a back and forth without interjection, predictable? Are you really so deeply entwined in my mind that I know what you would say if you could say it? Or is this just the easiest disagreement we've ever had? Your objections silenced by your final inability to comment. I think of you as caring. But even if you are somehow looking on, delaying the journey of the dead, how can you care about my daily matters while round you resonates the clash of empires falling, distant shouts of new worlds discovered, the magnificent dead? Why would you pause to consider the color of Emily's graduation dress, the cost of Daniel's cast, the problem of how to pay the gas bill? I need help here in the world of real things where you have left me, while you pursue some lofty contemplation of high import, like the meaning of life and death, continuance of the soul, the question of whether ashes are sacred, bones holy, the mingling of lives in a single grave, sacrilege. I need help, but when I try to call you back, you pass onward, farther away with each day's passing. You grow dimmer in my mind, but your words still linger, merging with mine in final judgment. So one thing that I've learned since Murray died is, for me anyway, getting through when it's really bad. One thing that really helps is just to grasp on to the small, firm things, the everyday things, even the domestic. And it's that knowing that I'm trying to capture in this poem, which is called Insistence. Clipped ivy slip, pale shoots in water, curled, waiting for sunlight. This I am sure of. Worm shrouded in spit, burrowed sleep beneath ice. Your voice in my dreams, these are certain. The wait for birth, insistence of spring, small, firm things, fragile as a slit tongue. So, Song of the Living is another poem that, again, it's just recognizing the importance of grounding in the everyday when the search for the meaning of death is just kind of overwhelming. It's called Song of the Living. Your breath escapes you. I take deep gulps of air, hold in my lungs what you held in yours, our last sharing. This thin-skinned house cannot contain what you have become. Air, light, the fragrance of bees. You stain the sky, but clouds do not define you. You soil the earth, but your ashes have no voice when I cannot sleep. Alone, I walk through mist of the river, wind from the hills. The long journey of your soul, so far from my knowing, has nothing to do with you and I. We are gravity, the pull down to stove and bed. This small world of Patterson Heights resonates with us. I walk the streets your feet touched, totter on the cliff edge we balanced on, stretch out my arms until at last I fall into sky. Uh, so the last section of the book is called Survival. And I think Echo of Ash would have had a certain narrative continuity if that last section could have been called Healing. But of course, I'm not sure that people ever really heal from a loss like this. They just somehow, hopefully, learn to move on. But that doesn't mean that you don't get really tired sometimes of grieving. And it's that kind of exhaustion and just wanting it to be over that I was trying to capture in this poem, which is called North Country Ash. Last Christmas, I went north again, remembering the golden spruce. Stuck in Smithers, the town shut for 2 days. I sliced cold ham, boiled roots in a water glass, never made kitimat, but stood on a bare rock in Telqua, feeling the absence of fish, a foreboding of fire. 14 hours north of Maine and Hastings, I remember traversing the Gold Rush Trail, Daniel vomiting in Cache Creek, Emily losing one pink gel sandal in Ashcroft. This summer, fire scalds a 100-mile house, Williams Lake. Jack pine thrives in boreal fire, but I'm tired of scourge and loss. Though the salmon will return, I've made my last journey through the Caribou Chilcotin, searching for the golden spruce, searching for you. So the problem is, just when you're feeling better, like you might be moving on, up pops a memory or a vision or an experience that kind of takes you right back where you were, as happened to me pretty recently and does still happen often, although the cycles get longer and farther apart. This poem is called A Visit. Just when I'm feeling cozy, in you pop from your party with the dead. A quick hello to remind me what I've lost. Your laugh, your stories, the one about the guy who died standing up. Then you're gone. It might be weeks or months before you come again. Never sheepish, never sorry. Just a warm shot of sunshine in late winter, shifting the color wheel before gray settles in. So I'm very thankful for everybody for coming tonight and sharing this with me. It was very hard for me to decide which poem I would end on, because I think there are kind of multiple directions that the poems are going in the last section. I want to say how grateful I am to Shelf Life Books for hosting this session. If you're interested, I would encourage you to pick up a book or order one online. It helps local independent bookstores and small literary presses. But I think I might have time. I picked two poems and I might have time to read the longer one, so I think I will. It's called Elegy, a Honeymoon Bay Cento. And a cento is a poetic form that is made up of lines from a whole bunch of other poems. And these were all written at a poetry retreat in Honeymoon Bay that was being run by Lorna Crozier. And the thing about a cento is that a group of poets can be given a sheaf of poems, all the same poems, and they pick out lines and they put them together, and everybody's cento is completely different. It has its own meaning, its own tone, its own direction. And to me, this cento really represents how I was feeling at the time in my grief journey, because it's a little scattered, a little disjunct, has a little bit of disjunction. It's not really totally clear where it's going, and yet there is a drift. It's also a poem that I think is much better read out loud, spoken out loud, than read on the page. So Elegy, a Honeymoon Bay Cento. I've bought and sold. I come apart and will be shattered, wilted in heat. A word, say Mississauga on a road sign. Of lovers, dozens, like the ones that led me here. A branching weed, one soul among the half-born choir. Mountains fall, wind sucked from my throat, I cannot speak. I read before discernment trained my eyes on saints. Still feel the heft, the kick, 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 admonished and blessed. Carrion, seeds embedded in the present flesh. All I see now is the way things seep. I lived in an apartment near the high school, a tight-lipped witness, shuttered and silent. From there, it seemed a clear shot through, and might have been but for the wild streak heifers overcoated in the desolate front room, those small particles of life unfurling. It is my body. I dry between my toes. Distrust of boats, lemon and curry, candle at dusk, perhaps a bit of jazz. I fly east in the fall, bouncing, not strung with others, irregular and odd. Oh, one who prepares a place. What I ask for now is forgiveness. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Turn it over to Vivian and her hard questions.
That was beautiful, just mesmerizing poetry. And I think you have access to people in the chat room. These are things that don't happen in a live launch. You don't get to go back to what people were chatting about and what they were saying. Well, the word beautiful comes up regularly. And Wayman pointed out moths wrapping themselves in another kind of memory. Yvonne Blomer, the quiet, endless becoming. So it's pretty clear that these poems hit a place of aching for most people in the audience, I would think. And on that note, Pam and I went over some questions the other night, and the more questions we asked, the harder it got. So Um, I'm just going to open that up here now with the questions that I devised. Pam, did you find it difficult to go from the private to the public when writing about the personal?
Well, I'd be lying if I said no. It's of course it's hard when you're writing privately and you're touching deep emotion. When you share that poem, whether you share that in a group for feedback or send it out for publication or put it together in a book. I have to say the book was the most nerve-wracking. Yes, it is difficult. However, it was helpful because I really truly was trying to, there's lots of stuff I left out because I thought that's just too individual. It's too much my story and something that I think is perhaps of less interest. So even though these are lyrical poems, you know, with a poetic, very strong I in these poems, they still, that was still my intent, was to try to touch on a more universal experience. So that helped make it seem less personal.
Yeah, there's quite a journey to all of that. And I always think there's a creative tension between writing therapeutically, which many of us do, that begins with poetry for many people, and getting a hold of the craft. Did you notice this kind of journey in your work, that you were writing therapeutically, but then it became a craft in a way?
Yes. For me, with my process, every poem goes through many, many edits. Sometimes it's ridiculous and I think it's neurotic, but maybe 20, 30 edits, maybe more. I don't know, it's ridiculous. So yes, it starts from a place where I try not to overthink what I'm writing, and then I sort of delve into it. And the more I delve into the craft, the less it feels like therapy. I don't think it's very interesting. These are sort of cri de coeurs, but you know, just to sort of you know, let it all out onto the page, I don't think is really very helpful to the, certainly not to the reader or to the kind of connection or communication that I'm striving for with the reader, and also not really very helpful for me as the poet, because poetry, like so many creative activities, it's meaning making. You're trying to make meaning out of the experience, and working with the craft, delving into these questions of craft can really help give you some objective perspective on the emotion.
So, yeah, so that maybe answers the next question in some way. How did your craft inform your approach to writing about grief? Did that kind of lift the darkness, lift the work in a different way, do you think?
Yes, and because they are poems about grief, I started, of course, like many people, just writing from my feelings. But I then did have a creative project, which was to try to work through this process. And as I said, to try to focus on what I thought were universal elements of this. And so then it quickly brings up questions like, what form is appropriate for this particular experience, or this expression of emotion. So with grief, you know, when I did look back at some of the poems, I wrote a lot more when I was a younger woman in my 20s, and I was interested to see that some of the sort of stamps of my voice are there in my 20s. And I think that they're here now, and some of those aspects work well with grief. So, for example, I'm very interested in sound and rhythm, the musicality of poetry, and I think musicality is well suited to elegy. and to poems of grief, because musicality is a kind of form. It's a formal property, and that helps move the expression out of the emotion, or maybe it's not moving it out of the emotion, maybe it's moving the emotion into the form, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, form equals content and vice versa. It's so important to find a poem's form in what you're saying. And I think as you get better with the craft, you are searching for and popping into the form a lot more easily as a writer, as a poet. So some people you mentioned have told you that there's an absence of Murray in this work. Why do you think that is so?
When I first started to share the poems with people and that comment was made, which keeps getting made, I was kind of worried about that. And I thought, am I avoiding something here? But I'm now quite comfortable with it, because the poems are not about Murray. The poems are about this experience of loss and grief. Of course, Murray did not experience the loss or the grief, lucky him. So, you know, I do have other poetic projects where I'm focusing on different things that I bring him in. I'm 5 years on, and I'm still not really ready to really bring him in a lot into my poems. And I there is for sure a little bit of sort of, you know, what's the word? Pain in my heart, right? Like I guess I'm sort of somewhat avoiding dealing with that. But it doesn't bother me that he's not in this collection. I would like to introduce him to the world in another way.
Yeah, that's very important. So we talked earlier about the metaphorical crypt as being a much more profound element, metaphorical element than just a memorial. Everybody sees the memorial as something that you strive for in your writing or whatever. But I'm closer to the crypt, having written about Old Man in A Tincture of Sunlight, and understand that collection to be a crypt for me that I could return to. A place where you can visit, where Murray is contained. How do you feel about that now? Does that have some
I
resonance
felt
for you?
when you brought that up the other night, I have to say I felt a bit dodgy because I do feel that you're touching on something there that's interesting and important. The book is dedicated to Murray, but it's actually not really a memorial to Murray, which I hope to do in some other work that I'm working on, where part of his family experience, the place that he grew up in Ontario, very different environment from myself. I would like to pay homage to that in other work. So I'm not sure that I would consider this collection a memorial. But really what you're asking is more to what extent, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, does the poet meet the missing, the absent person within the work? And for sure that happens. Even though Murray as a character is not in the poems, there is that dance. I mean, I'm not grieving in a vacuum, you know, that there is another person there. So yes, it's a very interesting question. I probably haven't answered it very adequately, but because I'm dodging.
I don't know that you can answer it, you know, clearly, because the more we discuss it, the more I realize it's my issue, not yours. So we don't have to do more than that. So you've also been concerned about being labeled the grief poet. Can we expect a different theme in your work in the future?
I sure hope so. Yes. I do write about all kinds of things, and at the same time, actually, because as there's many poets here tonight, as you know, you can't just sort of, pull them out of a hat when you need them. They have to sort of come when the time is right. So, in between, I'm writing about other things. I do have a couple of manuscripts. Darn, I think you're the only publisher here, Vivian, but that I am shopping looking for poems, and one of them is set on the coast, and it has a lot of nature poems in it. There's another one that really has to do with more, it's mostly a prairie setting, but it has to do with the gray line where the organic meets the inorganic, largely in geology and the landscape. And so those are very different subjects.
Great. Okay, so we're moving forward as a poet. I wanted to, there's some questions on our chat here. Wayman gets the first one and says, Pam, stunning work. Thank you. What most surprised you about grief and healing now that you have finished writing this book?
I was very lucky. I had not experienced the loss of a significant person in my life other than my grandparents, and it was a fair while ago. So I have to tell you, just about everything about grief was new to me. And I probably don't have an adequate answer, Wayman. I can just say that I worry about our sort of sanitized current society where death is tucked away, and people, those that experience it go through the grief, but it is often not, addressed or confronted. And so you can get these naive people like me where it's a complete shock. And I worry about that because we are all, we're in this aging baby boomer situation where many of us are going to be facing loss. We all face loss. So what did I learn? I don't know. Wake up. It's everywhere. It's part of life, right?
Yeah. And from Barbara Pellman, what a great line. The more I think of craft, the less therapeutic the poem feels. Exactly. And I know I felt that too when I'm dealing with something profound. Can you expand on that? You have more to say on that one?
Writing poetry is the place where I really forget my circumstances. It sounds like a cliche, but I said recently it's my happy place. It really is my happy place. And wrestling with those issues of craft, whether it's intellectually or with a less sort of academic approach, it really takes me, it's hard to, I was going to say it takes me out of myself, but I also feel it takes me more into myself, but in a way that is less stormy with emotion. I don't know if that answers it, but
well, I think we've all approached that in our work. Just some comments here that you should read too. Mark Lesage said, what is a soul? Where did Murray go? Your beautiful words and imagery show that these questions are best answered through poetry. Where someone goes. And Tanya Lelu, I got a sense of a quiet intimacy between you and Murray in the poems, one that I was not necessarily invited into, but could feel and felt honored to be near. So, yeah.
Mark is Murray's nephew, and I believe he's joining us from Murray's hometown, Tweed in Ontario. Thank you very much, Mark, for being here.
And a question from June R. Do you feel that aging is largely ignored and therefore more drastic when death happens?
Well, if you're talking about the whole problem and issue of widowhood, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful book that came out from Calgary editor Rona Ultros this spring. Does anybody remember the exact title? Vivian, do you know? I think you have a piece in it.
Yes, I do. It's called You Look Good for Your Age.
You look good for your age. There will be lots of pieces in there about
Mhm.
this issue of, yeah, for sure. There's a really important connection that is some people are exploring, but
Yeah.
needs a
Yeah.
lot more exploration. Yeah.
Well, that is kind of it for. I'm not seeing any more messages. Lots of proud of you, Pam. Stunning work,
Thank you.
and people carrying this work with them in profound ways here. So maybe what we should do is just turn it back to shelf life, and thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah.